look forward to having, hopefully what turns into almost a solid hour of play, free associative learning, an opportunity to suspend our judgment that we have on everything else that we're supposed to be doing, and on ourselves as we show up inside of that space, and to just be. So I'm Paul Stern. I also go by Keisho. I'm part of two different nonprofit organizations here in Winona. One, Manitou Center. Another one, Zen Garland Order. One does more secular work inside of the community around mindfulness and holistic human development. The other one is a administrative Zen center. A Zen center and the administrative center for a Zen organization, a worldwide Zen organization. So, Yeehaw, go Winona. Also extremely impressed to be able to catch just a little bit of stories that I was able to catch. I was just coming from another meeting at the university from that other aspect of my life as well. Wear a couple of hats. But it is tremendously inspiring to hear the work that takes place in Winona. I think, at least for me, part of it ends up being that we're all on this same island. So as we're on the island, seeing the Imagineering and compassion that people bring forward in the work they do is really, for the past 15 years, has been truly invigorating, and this morning was no different. So I'm going to walk us through a few activities today that have to do with what I like to call grokking the good life. So this term grok ends up coming from a text, stranger in a strange land, but it also lands in a different sense through the Zen community that I'm part of with one of our teachers who was a socially engaged Buddhist activist for pretty much his entire life. He started off his professional career doing the calculations that sent the first satellites to Mars in Los Angeles, and then switched gears and became a community activist, Bernie Glassman. So this idea of grokking is really like developing a felt sense around understanding, like not discounting our intellectual ability and capacity to understand things, but also that kind of gut sense of understanding that we have from living inside of the space of something. So without further ado, I'm going to see if I can manage technology, which is always a challenge, and dive into this presentation. This can be really interactive as well, so if you do have questions as we go along or comments, please feel free to jump right on in. Everybody see okay? Yep. Awesome. I love the Zoom experience where it's being so used to looking across a room of people, you have to look at the line of people doing them. Okay, so here's where we're gonna go. We're gonna take a moment to look at some models of self-care. It may sound kind of cheesy, but creating some sort of artifact that you have that you can stick on your fridge with your children's art, regardless of what age they might be, or a relative or a friend's, makes it more real. So having some sort of degree of what your intentionality is for balancing the different dimensions or facets of your life in a way that it gives you a solid foundation is important. So we'll talk about some ways to do that. We're going to look for a moment at who this thing you call you is before we jump in and we do some exploration around intentionality in shaping narratives. We're going to look at roles that we play in the course of our lives. We'll have the opportunity to map our day, and we'll probably end with a little bit of moving meditation. And I'm going to fit all of that in 45 minutes. So I'm going to be like the Micro Machines guy. All right, here we go. So ground rules, I said we're going to play. I spent a good portion of my 20s, extending into my 30s, living in Taiwan. It had a dramatic influence on the way I live my life. Speak Chinese, spent a lot of time reading Chinese as well. The language is really interesting in the way they use this term play. Like when we think of play, there seems to be some sort of diminutive aspect that comes into the activities that we're doing. From a more Chinese perspective, and something that I learned during the time that I spent in Taiwan, that play is really where we end up having the capacity to move things around in the space of our life with creativity and a suspension of judgment with this sort of beginner's mind. So if we can capture that idea of play when we get together with groups of people, you know, like even this meeting, having that space, that idea that we bring in of play. So part of that, maintaining that playfulness, that curiosity inside of the spaces of our life is coming in not knowing the environment we're stepping into. This is, you know, once again, this idea of not knowing is not saying we have to discount our thinking mind by any means, but keeping ourselves open to the idea that the story that we're shaping inside of our head might not be the story that we're walking into, oftentimes is not, and resonance and dissonance along that scale is created by the relationship of our image to the world we walk around in. More on that as we go forward. And then if we do end up moving around, or we do some meditating, or we do some breathing toward the end, know we're all gonna look goofy when we're on the screen with one another. And that goofiness, in our goofiness, suspend that self-judgment and just give yourself the space to play. Seem like achievable ground rules? Awesome. So you may have seen this model of self-care. This is something Winona State University, one of my homes away from home, has, that gives some dimensions to look at inside of your life. And this to me is a really great model in a lot of ways. It has us look at some intellectual pieces of our life that we have to support that aspect of growth and sustenance, spiritual dimension, however you would end up defining that, emotional wellness piece, environmental, social, occupational, physical, makes a nice wheel for us. But for me, it seems too abstract. I can't work with a model like that because it doesn't give me something I can like bite into, you know, it doesn't give me the flavor and juice of the apple. So for me, I have a model that I like to call How to Live Calm in the Chaos. And there's some really easy dimensions to this. I'll send out like a template that you can use that has this piece. And there's a couple of aspects that I like about this kind of model. One is on the outer rim, you see movement. All of these things are interconnected and interdependent. And being able to move and have that fluidity is what makes them actionable. They're also not very abstract ideas. Like, I don't have to think about what it means to eat. I just need to know that I have to. You know, inside of our working lives, we did at Manitou Center, we had the opportunity to do a resilience training with first responders that was tremendously successful and very eye-opening. Got to partner with people all across the nation. And I tell you, with the groups of people that we worked with here in Winona, one of the things that we ran into is that nobody takes the time to eat. So you could be on an 8 to 12 hour shift, and when you take a moment to sit down and engage with the fuel that you have that you put into your body, it becomes a 2.5 minute shoveling exercise before the next activity. So, you know, I give this as an option just to kind of plant in your mind as we walk through some of our activities today, thinking about what ends up being those important pieces for you. For me, it's eating. I have to have food. If I get hypoglycemic, I get grumpy. Nobody likes a grumpy bald man. Sleep doesn't have to be a lot, but I have to get at least 5 hours. Otherwise, I'm worthless. Movement's really important to me. I've been a martial artist and a martial arts instructor, a movement artist for the last 35 years of my life. If I can't move, I start to not be able to think. I start to not be able to interact. Movement is integral. Meditation is also very important for me. I'm a Zen priest, so meditation maybe goes as one of those job requirements. But meditation also ends up being a way of stepping into the space of our lives, just being present to the way we breathe. So that ends up being integral as well. Community, the kind of connection that we have here this morning, as well as other important community connections that we end up maintaining. And sometimes that's as easy as just making sure that we make it to the farmer's market on a weekly basis, to check in when we get coffee or buy our broccoli. Nature ends up being really important, particularly in these Zoom environments that we find ourselves in. I have to rewild a little bit. That means putting on the running shoes and getting outside and getting all muddy. Yeah, it means like sliding down hills, getting on a mountain bike and crashing just because I can out in nature. Though making sure there's space for that. And it doesn't, again, have to be a lot of space, but it has to be something. And then a lot of times this attitude of gratitude, remembering self-compassion and creating compassionate spaces for others, ends up being a piece of how I have to balance my day as well. There's a lot of things that feel like are taken away from us. Our ability to meet in person, our ability to have large events. In some ways, even my ability to be inside of the Manitou space is something that's missing. But there's also a tremendous, as that door closes, there's other doors that open up. Hearing other people talk about grant opportunities that came forward in their organizations, things like that that we can end up leaning into as well. So I'm going to ask you to take just a mental picture of this self-care model as something that we'll end up working on generating as we move through our shared time together today. So here we go. I'm going to ask you to get comfortable. So whatever that means, it might mean standing up, getting your feet flat on the ground, it might mean sitting in your chair. And I'm going to ask, here, I'm going to move my camera a little bit, super high-tech camera moving thing here. I'm going to ask that you take 2 really deep breaths as you settle into that space, right around this area of your body, right around your belt line. Maybe even we'll start by putting our hands together so we can visualize what that feels like to end up expanding. So I'm going to ask you to take the palms of your hands and just have them not touching, but really close to one another. So in full disclosure, there's a couple of Qigong points, acupuncture points that live right here called Lao Gong that are really easy to stimulate with temperature. So as your hands come close to one another here, you get this kind of like buzzing, almost magnetic kind of feeling, yeah? Just settling in. You can feel a little tingling maybe, a little heat sensation. So now as you inhale and you sink your breath down into your abdomen, you're gonna bring your hands apart really slowly at the same rate that you're breathing. Embodying our breath a little bit. As we exhale, we're gonna compress. And it feels good to breathe. Again, inhale. And exhale. One more. What the heck? So keeping that sense of breath, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes for just a couple of minutes. And I want you to think about this idea of who am I? And just watch what comes up. Just allow it to come up inside of that space. Don't really feel like you need to grab onto it, but just make note of all the things that come up when you draw that circle and you say everything inside of that circle is who I am. Everything outside of that circle is outside of me. What lives inside of that circle? So just sit with this in silence for about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes. So we'll use that bell to just bring ourselves back. And I'm going to ask you to take, just with this next minute, take a little inventory. If you got a pen or paper next to you, or you want to just keep a mental inventory, write down some of the things or make note of some of the things that came up in that exploration. This will be an important piece of information as we step into some of our other exercises and as we shape what that self-care wheel looks like. Again, we'll take just a minute. So as we come back to our larger group, did anybody encounter anything that surprised them while they were sitting, just allowing that to come forward? What kind of stuff did you run into when you asked yourself that question, that seemingly simple question of who am I? Feel free to just share out.
Hi, Paul, can you hear me?
I can hear you great. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, great. Well, I was just going to say that when I took a moment to be in silence, I just realized how tired and exhausted I am with so many changes. So when I first sat in that moment, I was like, oh, wow, I haven't like sat in peace for a while. Mm-hmm. So that came up right away.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks a lot, Crystal. Like the state that we're in right at that very moment that we have a tendency to ignore as we move through our day-to-day, that we can cover up with layers of narrative, that we can not pay attention to that tiredness or not pay attention to that fatigue. When we allow that to surface, it gives us an opportunity to address some of that. What else did folks run into? Maybe just a couple of other people.
Paul, this is Nancy Brown. What I thought was interesting is I've spent so much of my life career building, and I've always identified myself from my profession. But today, the first thing that I thought of is that I'm a child of God in this universe. Huh. And I'm a wife, a mother, a parent. I thought about everything else, but who I am as a professional, and that was really refreshing.
Yeah, and it's interesting when we do a value alignment, like where do we put our energy? What matters? You know, like what really matters? What if we look at where we put our energy in the course of our days, as that comes up as our defining factors of who we are really paying tribute to ourselves and supporting those foundational aspects of ourselves to the degree that we need to. That's awesome. Thanks a lot for sharing that.
This is Aaron. I tend to be a very self-critical person, but it was nice that my list was full of positive thoughts about, being dedicated or a friend or giver, with a little bit of selfishness thrown in there just to bring me down, but to keep me grounded.
Which is very important to have in there as well. So in doing this activity, I think this is a great activity to have as an extension piece for checking in with ourselves, and for the very reasons that Nancy, Aaron, and Crystal brought up. Giving ourselves a check-in for where we're at right now in the present moment. We so often get tied up in the motion of our day-to-day that we forget that we're creating that day-to-day piece, that there's a co-creative piece that we play in there. We're shaping that narrative. If we're meeting our needs and we're caring for ourselves and we're creating a foundation that we can walk through, whether that's any of the roles we play, our professional lives, parenting, being a partner, all of those are smoother when we have our needs met. If we create dissonance inside of that situation, or we create what we like to call a hungry ghost inside of ourselves, an aspect of ourselves that isn't really getting fed, right? it'll find ways to nourish itself. So it's like setting up proactively to have restorative resilience based models that we have in our life that can meet those times that we really have to push and we need to get through and we're going to be tired without having to have deleterious ongoing aspects that come forward. So I'm going to tie in to some of this activity, and I'm going to ask you guys to follow along with these pictures. And we're going to do a little narrative shaping. And again, I want you to just watch that headspace, right? I'm going to show you a bunch of images. It's going to be a highly sophisticated set of images that we walk through, developed by, oh, I got stuck in my presentation here. Istvan Banyai, who's a children's author. Yeah, the sophistication of childhood. So we're going to walk through this presentation called Zoom and playfully just allow what comes up as we shape the narrative of these images, recognizing, well, we'll just leave it at that. So I want you to look at this and just let your mind run free a little bit. See how it makes you feel. See what associative thoughts come up. What do you think this is? Oh, there we go. A little recontextualizing. How many people with a show of hands thought it was a rooster? So take a minute with this image as well. Allow yourself that natural activity of shaping the narrative. Notice the image. It's a handsome chicken. Oh. Still have the comb. The comb is still a perspective that we're incorporating into this expanding narrative, right? This idea of expanding narrative is important. We see some additions to our picture. We got a window. Looks like maybe a couple of little people. Oh. Check out how this story shifts. Everybody see the bee in the upper right-hand corner? Okay, here we go. So that looks like a farm up on Garvin Heights. Modern day farm, right? Maybe not. But let yourself shape that narrative and know as we look through, our perspective allows us to look through this window that our rooster is still there with that funky looking comb that it had on its head as well. Oh. Reshaping perspective is an important activity as we look around. Maybe an older farm. They would benefit from the Amish roofers that redid our barn some years ago when we were renting across the river, I think. But wait, what happened? What happened to my beautiful farm that I shaped? And those kids, I had a whole story about those children. Oh, and I remembered that rooster. It was just like my rooster. Huh. So still, try not to get in the way of shaping that narrative. Allow yourself to shape a narrative and tell yourself a story about these images as we continue moving. What? What's happening here? Take a minute and really zoom in on this. Rooster's still in there. Kids are still in there. Just shifting context a bit. See the fingers in the upper right? Why does it say toys in my world? Huh. Whoa. That's not my farm. That's not a farm at all. That's a magazine. I'm not on Garvin Heights. So allow yourself to like play in that space. Take in information and see what comes up. Where are we at? Maybe that's the overlook at Crisco Commons coming off the student union there. Oh, no, don't have that at Crisco Commons. Uh-oh, we're not in Winona anymore. So allow yourself the space to take in some of the details and shape the narrative. See how your narrative meets the reality and where it fails to meet the reality as the context shifts. Huh. So our chicken's still in there. Our kids are still in there. Our farm is still in there. All of those notions that we had are still wrapped up inside of there as well. We're going to continue shifting here. What do you think that pointy thing is in the left-hand corner? Huh. Bus is still there, ship is still there, magazine's still there, farm's still there, kids are still there, rooster's still there. So as we shift, just notice how you're both able to shift your own narrative in the story and where you may have areas of resistance. Just make note of that. Open up to that with some curiosity. Huh. I feel like I've been there. Maybe it's kind of around Sedona. But what's going on the bottom? Oh, I don't feel like I've been there. We're not in Arizona anymore. Home. So I really love this activity because it gives us the opportunity to see how natural it is for us in the safe context of looking at a children's story, how we shape these narratives on an instantaneous basis. We start telling ourselves the story of the realities we find ourselves in. And those either become tremendously empowering pieces of the way we move through our day, or tremendously encumbering, or somewhere along that continuum. And there's a tremendous amount of agency that we can end up exacting in doing this very simple thing of choosing. Choosing inside of those spaces to allow ourselves the opportunity to shape those narratives, because that's a natural part of our humanity, a natural part of how we show up in the spaces of our day. But realizing that those narratives that are tied up with our pasts and our projected futures that we want to see, and all of the anticipated pieces that come on the chain in between, that narrative building process doesn't necessarily have to connect in the space of our lives in a way that's always resonant. Right? And we have an opportunity to shift. When the context shifts, we have areas where it's really easy for us to change our perspective, like maybe seeing the boot and getting to Arizona was really easy. But then all of a sudden when you're hanging out on Fiji, you're like, whoa, what happened? How did I get there? And where are the kids and the chicken? So imagine how that works in the course of your day-to-day life. this is a little activity that I like to do. Probably on about a monthly basis, I walk through one of these. And this takes that narrative shaping activity and allows me to personalize it and give myself a map that I can build off of. So if I have that wellness chart that I have on my fridge, I have something like this that lives somewhere on my desktop, or maybe on my office bulletin board at the university. But what I've done here is I've done a map that's a story. I think a lot in images. I don't know when that started. It's pretty much always been the case. I noticed that it was more comfortable for me in some ways to articulate thoughts and ideas I had with Chinese because it didn't have an alphabet that I had to spell stuff out with. It gave me the opportunity to take an ideogram and place that inside of the conceptual framework that I was building in. So I use that. That's something that I've realized that I feel very comfortable with. You might use words in something like this, but what I've done is I've graphed out a typical day in the life of Paul. So I start off, I'll walk you through this, and then you'll have an opportunity to kind of make one of these on your own as well. I start off really early in the morning. I wake up usually around 4:30, and I like to sit. Maybe it's outside, maybe it's inside, maybe we have a little koi pond in our backyard. Maybe it's there. What matters most is I get to step into the day before the rest of the world does. I get to have that quiet space where I'm stepping with intentionality into my space of realizing the way the day is coming forward. That's followed almost immediately by a cup of coffee. And these are crucial moments. If I miss meditation or coffee, I know I'm going to be crooked for the entire day, like the VA dad, where I'm going to be leaning Tower of Pisa-ish, stepping into my day. So this idea of roles that we had with the who am I activity we did in the beginning, where you see like I am a father, I am a professional, I am a director, I am a community member. These roles have fluidity that shift too. Here I'm just a sitting guy. Here I'm just a cup of coffee. I'm warm. I'm everything that comes up as I engage with that. And then a shift happens. My little people wake up and it's action time, usually. It's my responsibility most of the time to get both kids to school. They almost never go to the same school. Luckily, Winona's a small town by comparison, so I don't feel like I have to cross a metro area to get them anywhere. But this changes the roles I have. So in those early portions of the day, if I have stability to step off of, it's easy for me to transition and have flexibility in my narrative stepping into that next space. If I don't, well, then I have a crisis moment where I have to make a decision. So how do I plan for that? So as my day goes forward, I flow through, I get the kids to school, and then I apologize to everybody who has anything to do with Winona State University and their marketing pieces, but I tried for a flaming W here. It was a 1.5-minute sketch in my defense. So then I go and I have another role I play as a director and a leader at Winona State University and as a service provider advisor and sometimes a classroom teacher, teaching adjunct coursework there. So there's a lot of different roles that happen here. And my ability to step into all of those roles with any degree of fluidity, with some sort of flow, is contingent on, I realized very early on, these early portions of my day having some degree of resolution. If I have business from those other pieces of the day that I bring forward into these environments, I'm going to be off again. I'm not going to have my head in the meeting that I'm sitting in. I'm going to be doing outside work, reading emails when I'm sitting in a place where I should have my attention focused on the activities at hand. So after here, I transition either to home or to Manitou. That's a really poorly drawn ENSO, that paintbrush circle. Yeah, again, apologize for the artwork there. Where I'm a partner with Trish and a parent with Trish and the kiddos. Here as well, I may step out where I'd be a facilitator doing developmental kind of work, or a facilitator facilitating development for the organization, guiding it with some vision. I might be doing actual instructing and coursework moving through the spaces. I may be just creating environments when I go to Manitou, but I have these aspects of roles I play there as well. So then at the bottom, I got this parking lot that comes in that has resonant kind of pieces of myself that pop up when things don't go well that I know I'll have to have a mitigating factor for. So I had a really loving family when I was growing up, but they were also pretty hard people that drove myself and my foster brothers, drove us to accomplish, you know, pretty much everything we could and maybe couldn't quite in the course of our lives. So there's this feeling of not quite being good enough that ends up being pervasive. So if I start to wobble, that not good enough voice comes in my big deal mind when the narrative starts spinning up. Like, I wasn't good enough to get the meditation in, I missed the coffee, the kids were late for school, and I missed an appointment that Trish told me about like 8 billion times. All of those have that not good enough piece that comes forward that I know is an echo that I have to deal with. And that may or may not be an actual piece of that situation, but that's a really loud voice that comes forward. So inside of this space, what I end up doing is graphing a map that allows me a context where I can be alive in the space of my day without falling into the same rut. So I'm going to take, again, I'm going to give you twice as much time as I had when I initially did this. And I'm going to ask you where you're sitting to just take 3 minutes. So that's double the time. So you don't have a whole lot of time to be precise with your artwork, and graph out your day. That'll be the first part. Maybe just a couple of points and transitions of roles that you play, activities, contexts, environments that you move through of significance on the average day. And I'll give us a bell at the 3-minute mark to come back. As you work through this, remember to still have that attitude of play, where you get to, it's discovery, there's curiosity, a sense of not knowing as you plan through this very familiar pathway of your day, bringing a kernel of curiosity to what's unfolding for you. When you have a meditation center, you have a lot of bells. Cushions and bells. So that kind of brings us full circle back to the place that we started. As you look at that artifact that you ended up creating of walking through your day in the life, like just take a moment and, you know, circle, star, highlight, however you want to make it stand out, maybe make a mental note of those critical areas of transition in the course of your day. Being able to be adaptive is a huge piece of resilience. Being able to not be attached to absolutism in our outcomes allows us the opportunity to recontextualize based on new information. It allows us fluidity inside of our perceptions as they come forward. So what does this have to do with everything that happens at Manitou? Well, when we look at holistic human development, so much of what we do is this interplay of the way we move through our lives, the way we tell our stories and narratives of how that unfolds. Really, a lot of the practices that we do at Manitou are supportive of giving a pathway of exploration into these areas that are scaffolded and allow us the opportunity to be vulnerable with ourselves, have those moments of honesty and playfulness, a beginner's mind in looking at the person that, you know, we wake up to every day, and start to build foundational pieces upon which we can end up stepping as we walk along the path of our life, allowing, you know, planning that we do to have fluidity to be able to change. When we realize all the roles that we have to assume in the course of any given day, like in this picture, you look at all the changes you have to do. You should pat yourself on the back, you know, for being a superhuman on the best of days. So in a world of like social and cultural redefinition and struggle and pandemic, like imagine everything that comes up when you're trying to transition between those aspects inside of your life, and how important it is to have space to support yourself as you step into those areas. So I offer this fridge document again at the end to look at. We walked through, we did the Who Am I activity where you had an opportunity to just let surface those qualities that are important to you, those roles that are important to you, those ways of being, those contexts, those descriptive terms that other people would use to describe you, right? We saw that kind of come to the surface a little bit. We got to play around and zoom and see how quickly our narrative ends up shifting when we have new information, and how fluidity inside of that space allows us the opportunities to catch more details as that change ends up inevitably happening as the context of our lives or the book end up shifting. And then we took that and we looked at how roles, even in the course of our life, take on this kind of Zoom-esque kind of space, where if we start off at the beginning of our day and we get to just the time we get to go to sleep, that's the time we go to sleep before we wake up an hour later, remembering we forgot something for the day that we were coming into. That there's a tremendous amount of flow and change that happens inside of that space. So meditation in that sense, you know, maybe commonly meditation ends up being thought of as this thing where you put your body in a certain postural alignment, you sit on a special cushion or you sit in a special chair and you breathe. But really that activity inside of that laboratory is designed to be generalized across all of these areas of your life, to be the space that you can cultivate and you can open up in that Zoom kind of capacity as you move through realizing you didn't wake up in time to meditate in the morning and you missed your coffee and you still have to get your kids to school. Being able to show up inside of those spaces, that's really the skill set that we're cultivating. And it would be the same in movement. We did just a brief activity of seeing how bringing our hands in close contact with one another creates a different kind of sensation, almost like a calming sensation for many people. And that when we expand the way we breathe to use our whole body, even just using our hands, there's a change that happens. There's this bellows kind of effect that incorporates into our day. And having that circumstance, having that change in our environment be a space that we can learn and train in, really gives us an opportunity to build that kind of holistic support as we step into our days. So with that, I will pause and take air in so I get some oxygen and don't fall over, and just open up for question, comment about the experience that we just shared.
I'm curious just because there's always a million things running through my head. And there's all of those unfinished projects. How do you, when you're not in the moment of dealing with that issue, shut that out so that you can focus on the thing that you're facing currently?
I don't think I ever shut anything out anymore. I don't, it's not, as soon as I try to suppress anything, I create a whole nother problem. You know, I mean, it's really finding a different way to hold what's coming up for me in that space. And, you know, the work we do at Manitou or the work we do at Dharma River is really working with people to provide the scaffolding that folks can come up with that framework that they need for themselves in that space, to discover, like, what is it if I have all that unfinished business that's running back there? Maybe that's like who I am. Maybe that unfinished business keeps running, but what is that telling me about the space I need to create to allow that voice to, you know, be heard, and that piece of consciousness to have activity it can engage in and still move through the space of my day, if that makes sense. I feel like anytime I try to put a lid on something, it's sort of like, you know, shaking up the pop can and opening it. It just explodes out in an unintentional way. I still do it, but, you know, I kind of know it's going to happen. Great question, though, Aaron. Thanks. Does that answer what you were looking for, kind of?
Yeah, it does. I should stop avoiding and just allow and deal instead of push.
Well, and it's a choice we make, right? Even realizing we have the agency to choose is a huge step. Other thoughts or questions? Great. Well, I put everybody in the alpha wave zone. Thanks to all for really taking this shared walk together. Hopefully you got a couple of kernels of something that you can play around with. If anybody is interested in, you know, further exploration along these lines, always feel free to reach out to, you know, Trish or I. We are more than happy to custom tailor any sort of workshop for professional, personal, otherwise environments. You know, lots of experience working in educational environments, professional environments of all sorts. So we'd be happy to Imagineer with the rest of our Winona friends. So with that, I'll pass it over to Brian, perhaps.
Yeah, thanks. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I just said thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. That was really incredible. And thanks for the generosity of time and spirit for being with us this morning. This is really the intention of this second hour, is that we have so much wisdom and so much expertise across so many areas in community that this is an opportunity for us every couple months to bring some of that in to benefit all of us as nonprofit leaders and as just as like humans in community. So thank you, Paul, for all of that. I think we appreciate the time together. We have, I think I'll just bring this to a close just by mentioning a couple things. There was a couple references to a shared email list, and especially for newer folks, that's really valuable. It's in the agenda that went out. It's in every communication that goes out. It's just Winona Nonprofits at googlegroups.com. Use that freely. It's a really great resource. You can share upcoming events. You can ask questions to the group. Whatever you want to use that for, it's there for you. We also have a private Facebook group which got a little less active with the email list, and we'd love to kind of kick that back too. And so find that. It's the Nonprofit Alliance on Facebook, and there's a group attached to it. We're still negotiating what we want to do for, you know, we had our weekly check-ins for some number of months, and we're gonna look at doing something to keep folks connected between now and November. But other than that, our next big meeting is the second Wednesday of November, whatever day that is. But you have calendar invites for that from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. And we'll have plenty of reminders going out. I know most of us, if you're like me, are dealing with what's in front of you the next couple hours, let alone in November. So we'll figure that out. So thanks for being with us here this morning. Amanda texted me and said she's listening to us, but she's caught in suspended animation and she can't get her video to work. So she's there in spirit. So thank you to Amanda, our president, for leading the group this morning. And thanks everybody for taking the time. So, you know, enjoy and go forward with the rest of your day, and stay in touch, and we'll be in touch with everybody soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.